Hi everyone, my name is Wyatt McCabe. I will be speaking for the affirmative side of euthanasia. I'm pleased to be given this great opportunity. I'm greatly interested in the topic of euthanasia and supporting my claim in regards to the topic. Before getting into things, I would like to take a moment to define a couple of terms that will be used in today's debate. The two terms are euthanasia and autonomy. The Merriam-Webster Dictionary defines euthanasia as the act or practice of killing someone who is very sick or injured in order to prevent any more suffering. And the definition of autonomy is the state of existing or acting separately from others, so it is kind of like a sense of self-government. In America, euthanasia is illegal in every state. I think that this is ridiculous. I mean, if a person is suffering, they have the right to a quick, peaceful death. Also, this affects no one other than the patient himself. I see nothing wrong with this practice overall, and doctors also have to be fine with the operation of euthanasia. If they do not personally want to perform the action, another doctor can. Due to this, the welfare of doctors' states and minds will not be at risk. With these words in mind, I stand resolved that euthanasia should be made a legal, viable medical operation under the condition that the patient gives full consent for the performance of the operation. My value criterion is that everyone has a right to death just as much as they do to life, because it's the best tool with which to measure if my value is being upheld in this debate. I have three contentions. Each of these contentions uphold my value. My first contention is that humans have the right to not suffer. As mentioned by famous Czech Republic author Milan Kundera, it is ironic that the one advantage that dogs have over people is the right to a merciful death. If a human is suffering so much that they do not have the desire to live any longer, the government should not keep them from doing so. Also, due to the religious views of some, death will bring them into the afterlife where they will forever live without pain. Even for the non-religious, they look to death as a way to reach peace. If death is what makes them happy, they have the right to death. The Declaration of Independence states that Americans have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. If death in the times of suffering falls into the person's pursuit of happiness, they are entitled to that. It affects no one other than themselves. My second contention is that death is a matter that is private. It affects no one other than the individual, and the government has no right to interfere. Also, euthanasia does no harm to anyone, not even the individual. Euthanasia is a painless practice. Some may argue that euthanasia is a violation of God's will for the person to live. However, the First Amendment of the United States Constitution prevents any law in favor of a religious organization to be enacted. Euthanasia is also completely constitutional, and any argument held against it is unconstitutional. Lastly, my third contention is that euthanasia can be controlled. It will not be granted to any individual without their total consent. However, it will only be used in the most serious of occasions. To ensure that euthanasia is given solely to patients who have requested it and not accidentally given to other patients, two-factor authentication would have to be involved. Instead of only one source having access to the drugs to perform euthanasia, two or more would have to be there to ensure the safety of other patients. With strict rules, there is no reason as to why euthanasia cannot be regulated overall. In conclusion, having supported my value of autonomy, I urge an affirmation of the resolution that euthanasia should be made a legal, viable medical operation under the condition that patients give full consent for the performance of the operation. Thank you. Now I stand for question.
You made the comment that euthanasia policies are completely constitutional, and that because the Constitution guarantees United States citizens the right to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, that they have the right to a peaceful death. However, in Vacco v. Quill and Washington v. Glucksberg, the United States Supreme Court ruled that the United States Constitution does not guarantee the right to die to U.S. citizens.
I wasn't referring to the Constitution. I was referring to the Declaration of Independence. The Constitution does not go over the right to the pursuit of happiness. The Declaration of Independence does. The reason I brought this up is because the Declaration of Independence states that we have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The pursuit of happiness, in that sense, was very important, given the fact that we were breaking away from Great Britain. We all wanted to be happy. That was the point of us being here. Hence our religious freedoms and other things like that. We want to be free and we want to be happy. If our happiness affects no one, there's no reason as to why we cannot pursue our happiness. There's a difference between the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. I mean, this would have to be raised. That aspect was not raised in this. This was a constitutional battle. This was not dealing with the Declaration of Independence in this case.
You said that doctors will have to be okay with these euthanasia policies, but the doctors' Hippocratic oaths, basically, Hippocratic oath tells doctors that they will do everything in their power to ensure a patient lives the longest time they possibly can. And to mercy kill a patient, so to speak, literally breaks that very premise of that entire oath.
Yes, and along with the law, like currently, euthanasia is not a legal practice in America. If it were made legal, the Constitution, like say if there's an amendment to the Constitution changes. If euthanasia was legal, the law would be changed as well as the Hippocratic Oath. The Hippocratic Oath would have to be amended. It's not a stone cold thing that is set in stone that you cannot change. I mean, it would have to be amended as well as the law. Now, doctors that had agreed to the previous Hippocratic Oath would not have to follow through with this if they do not believe with it. New doctors, however, would be given this new Hippocratic Oath.
You're essentially saying that doctors no longer have to... You're removing the entire premise of the Hippocratic Oath and basically stating that you want to get rid of the part that says doctors will do their utmost, everything in their utmost power to ensure the long-term care of the patient.
I mean, it would have to be altered with the exception of mercy killing. I mean, it would just have to be amended. It's not changing the whole premise exactly. I mean, it's just adding this to it.
It's altering the entire premise. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Grant Briers, and I'll be speaking against euthanasia and instances of extreme medical discomfort. I appreciate the opportunity to speak on behalf of this issue. With a number of horrendous, often chronic and incurable diseases in the world, an individual's right to death in such circumstances has come into question. There are a variety of reasons why euthanasia should remain illegal within the boundaries of the United States. Proponents of the legalization of euthanasia argue that individuals have the right to die with severe pain, but allowing suicide in the case of illness is a slippery slope to embark upon. There are a number of reasons why we shouldn't legalize euthanasia. It breaks the doctor's Hippocratic Oath. It leads to a commercial interest in patient death through reducing medical costs and resulting in beneficiaries receiving the victim's settlement and life insurance policies. Living wills cannot guarantee that the proper person makes such an important decision for a patient to be euthanized if such a patient is incapacitated and unable to make the decision themselves. It would create a lot of religious conflict within various denominations in the country. The average society could easily fall victim to such practices as well, and the government does not need to be involved in end-of-life decisions. I intend to prove that euthanasia is not only wrong on a moral level, but also an ineffective means of dealing with human suffering that should never be allowed to become legal within the United States. There's a plethora of reasons it should not be legalized. To legalize the authorized killing of another human individual due to illness is the first step of embarking upon a host of other problems down the road, such as abusive euthanasia policies by insurance companies and other issues that go along with the insurance company policies. Proponents argue that an individual has a right to die, but that such a right is not guaranteed to United States citizens. Though we are given the right to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, we are not given the right to die. The Supreme Court ruled in 1997 in Washington v. Glucksberg and Vacco v. Quill that United States citizens do not have the right to die. Jack Kevorkian, who was a doctor that was assisting in euthanasia practices, was convicted of murder for assisting one of his patients in suicide. Why would he be convicted of murder for such a thing if it was so morally upright to end someone's suffering? Virtually every medical organization views euthanasia as unethical. You can go to any medical group, association of doctors, and the 99.9% of the time, doctors oppose it. Doctors attempt to do everything in their power to save a human life, and to force them to take a patient's life is an unfair burden on the medical professional emotionally and mentally. You're putting a life or death decision into the hands of a medical professional as to whether or not they will administer euthanasia drugs to a patient. If the patient were incapacitated, it would be difficult, even with a living will, to determine the proper individual to make the life or death decision for the victim. It would be an unfair burden on family members. For example, you have a mother who is severely ill and incapacitated in a coma. She cannot make the decision. However, within her living will, she's designated you, her child, to make such a decision for her. How do you come to make that decision? It's an unfair burden to place on a family member to choose whether or not a relative lives or dies. And euthanasia entirely breaks the doctor's Hippocratic Oath. Hippocratic Oath basically states that doctors will do everything in their power in order to make sure a patient lives as long as possible and receives the best medical care they can. And to kill a patient to end suffering would entirely break that oath, and the entire premise of that oath of doctors to do everything in their power to take care of the patient. The the unfair emotional and physical burdens that would be placed on both the doctor and the decision maker, the ability of insurance companies and beneficiaries to exploit such policies, and the religious conflicts that all result from euthanasia coalesce to clearly indicate that it is a policy that is far from merciful and should not be permitted to be legal.
I have a few questions in regard to your previous statements. First off, I have a question regarding the Hippocratic Oath. You brought up the Hippocratic Oath and how it would be a violation of the Hippocratic Oath if euthanasia was legalized. Do you agree that the Hippocratic Oath can't be changed, or do you think that it's something set in stone?
The Hippocratic Oath can be changed. You can alter it just like you could alter any law in the books of the United States. However, what you're altering when you alter the Hippocratic Oath to allow euthanasia policies to be legalized is the entire premise that doctors will provide the utmost care to their patients to ensure the longevity of a patient's life.
Okay. And you brought up incapacitated patients. For incapacitated patients in other countries, no one can make the decision for them for euthanasia to be granted other than the person themselves. If they're incapacitated, euthanasia will not be granted to them, whether it is in their will or not. So, what do you think about this?
I just feel like that if patients have the right to death, they also have the right to designate a loved one or trusted individual to make a decision for them to put them out of their suffering if they're in such a state of suffering.
That would have to be decided if euthanasia was pursued and legalized in America. However, a personal view, I do not think that others should be able to make the decision for the incapacitated victim due to the fact that, say, the doctor read the will wrong and someone else was given the right to decide euthanasia for their loved one, then lawsuits could arise in other situations. You also brought up religious conflict. What sense of religious conflict do you think could be brought about?
First thing comes to mind is the Christian Ten Commandments. Thou shalt not kill. And it would cause a lot of tension within different religious groups if one were to legalize such a policy.
Okay. I have no further questions. Thank you for your time. Grant Breyer, speaking for the negative side of euthanasia, brought up many points in his arguments. First was the Hippocratic Oath. He said that changing the Hippocratic Oath would also be changing the main principles which doctors pursue in their career, which is to do whatever they can to elongate the lives of patients who they are serving. However, if euthanasia was made legal, the Hippocratic Oath would also change. Old doctors would not be held to the new Hippocratic Oath. If they did not believe in the new one, they would continue as they agreed to the old Hippocratic Oath. New doctors would be sworn in given the new Hippocratic Oath. Things would be differently, and they would just be made the exception of euthanasia. Also, you brought up religious conflict. There can be no law, according to the First Amendment of the United States Constitution, there can be no law made in favor of a religious organization. Therefore, religious conflict would not be in the way of euthanasia. If it was, it would be violating the Constitution, which is one of your main premises for this argument. Also, I do not believe that there should be government involvement in life-death matters. For example, the government cannot prohibit someone from being born. Why should they be able to prohibit someone from dying if they're not comfortable with living? If they not want to live and it makes them happy to die, as the Declaration of Independence grants the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, if this pursuit of happiness affects no one other than the person himself, what would be wrong with them terminating their own life? Also, you brought up the fact that why would a doctor who helped a patient with physician-assisted suicide be arrested if it was not morally upright? Not everything that people are arrested for is for morally upright reasons. For example, Rosa Parks was arrested for not getting off the bus in the civil rights movement. That does not mean that the police officer who arrested her was morally upright. I'm sure that everyone would agree with that statement. On that note, I have no further statements. Your turn.
There are a plethora of reasons that euthanasia should not be legalized within the United States. To legalize the authorized killing of another human being, individual, due to illness is the first step of embarking upon a host of other problems down the road, such as abuse of euthanasia policies by insurance companies, insurance beneficiary abuse, religious issues, ineffective living wills, victimization of society's lower classes, and the government becoming involved in such a personal matter as life and death. My opponent has argued that an individual has the right to die because United States citizens are guaranteed the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. However, that right does not include the right to die, regardless of whether or not it makes them happy. The Supreme Court ruled in Washington v. Glucksberg and Bacco v. Quill in 1997 that individuals do not have the right to die. Virtually every medical organization opposes euthanasia. That's got to account for something. All the medical professionals within the United States are saying they don't want this to be legalized. They don't want to be forced to carry this out, and they don't want to be forced to make such a decision as this. Doctors have a Hippocratic oath they take when they become doctors to provide the best possible care they can to their patients. Doctors want to do everything in their power to save a human life, and to force them to take a patient's life is an unfair burden on the medical professional emotionally and mentally. My opponent has continually argued that the Hippocratic oath can be altered or changed. He's right. It can be changed. However, to allow euthanasia within the Hippocratic oath would alter the entire basis of the oath itself. The oath basically is saying that doctors are going to do everything in their power to take care of a patient, and to basically say it's okay to simply take a patient's life because to end their suffering would reduce the quality of palliative medical care that would be provided. Society's lower classes could fall victim to euthanasia policies being legalized. Rather than provide expensive medical treatment and deal with some of the more lowly classes within the United States, euthanasia would become a much easier option. Additionally, insurance companies stand to benefit from such policies. A one-time euthanization drug would be much cheaper than providing continued long-term care such as chemotherapy or radiation to a patient with cancer. Also, life insurance policies, the family members who have another family member that is victim to a disease and on the verge of making the decision to be euthanized would stand to benefit from leading that individual towards that decision so they could gain the life insurance settlement. Basically, you don't want euthanasia to be legal because it's going to reduce the quality of medical care within the United States. It's going to allow insurance companies to commercially benefit from such policies, and the government does not need to be involved in life or death decisions. Thank you.
In conclusion, I still stand affirmed on my view of euthanasia, that euthanasia should be made a viable legal medical operation in the United States. The Hippocratic Oath can be altered, and it does not defeat the premise that doctors can do whatever they can to keep patients alive. Also, medical care would not be reduced, as Grant has said. He said the medical care would be reduced if euthanasia was made legal. The medical care would not be reduced whatsoever. Euthanasia would not be something that was forced on a patient or imposed on them in any way whatsoever. Euthanasia is something that the patient must request and fully agree with and sign documents for it to be performed upon them. Also, the court case that you brought up, where they ruled that we did not have the right to death, was based on the Constitution. The Declaration of Independence was not in play or brought up. If the Declaration of Independence was brought up, where it says we have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness more so than the others, I believe that the outcome would have been different. Because death would be in this person's pursuit of happiness, and if death does not hurt anyone other than the person himself, this means that euthanasia should be legal and it has no reason to be illegal. Then again, I stand affirmed on my view of euthanasia. I thank the audience for coming and watching, and I thank the judges, and thank you, Grant.